Hello, Mr. Frenzy here, and Bones again. Everybody's favorite is Bones. Bones, you should start leading this instead of me. You need to speak up a little bit more because I'm getting tired of doing these videos. Just kidding. All right, here we go. Well, we're going to start. We've been talking about how energy is being transferred through the ecosystem, through food webs, food chains, different feeding relationships, and all of this different kind of stuff. Today, we're going to talk about how energy moves through the environment through cycles. Energy is constantly being moved around. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some non-living things and how the energy cycles through them. For instance, the water cycle. Now, everybody has learned about the water cycle before. You guys have talked about the water cycle since you've been little kids in elementary school. The water cycle basically is run by the sun. It starts with evaporation. Evaporation, remember, is when the water warms up and moves from a liquid form, okay, up into the sky to a water vapor, a gaseous form. Now, when water gets high enough in the sky, it starts to get cold. Okay, the cold takes the water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. This is known as condensation. Okay, and it forms clouds. Now, the clouds eventually become so heavy that the clouds can't hold the water up in the air anymore. So it starts to rain or snow or sleet or hail. And this is what's known as precipitation. So materials, okay, as well as energy, can move through the ecosystem because of the energy of the sun. So we have the water cycle is very simple. It's evaporation, water moving up into the air, condensation, that water solidifying and not solidifying, condensing back into water form, and then finally precipitation, where it returns back to the earth. So that's one way the sun helps the water move energy around our ecosystem. Another type of cycle that is out there is called the carbon-oxygen cycle. Now, you may have heard the old saying that if you talk to your plants, they're going to grow better, okay? And that old wise tale, it has some truth in it. And the reason that came about is the carbon-oxygen cycle deals with photosynthesis in plants and us breathing or our respiration. So when we talk, sing, or breathe on plants, what are we breathing on them? What are we breathing on them, Bones? What do we breathe out? What's the gas that we breathe out? Carbon dioxide. Good. So we breathe out carbon dioxide on plants, okay? The plants use that carbon dioxide with sunlight to undergo photosynthesis, and photosynthesis produces oxygen for us to continue to breathe. So this happens over and over and over again, and this is what's known as the carbon-oxygen cycle. So that old wise tale is like plants will grow better if you sing to them or talk to them. There's a little bit of truth in that, actually, where it actually came from. Okay, now could you just go up to them and go, like blowing out birthday candles? Absolutely, it would do the same exact thing. So if you aren't going to be a star on American Idol or The Voice, then you can just talk to them, read to them, do whatever you want. But just blow carbon dioxide basically on them. So this is how it works. So we breathe out carbon dioxide. It gets absorbed by the plants. Plants undergo photosynthesis. They produce oxygen for us to breathe, and the cycle continues. It never ends. The same sort of thing happens when we burn fossil fuels or when organisms die. When we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That carbon dioxide is then absorbed by the plants, and the plants produce oxygen for us then in turn to breathe. So we rely on the plants, and the plants rely on us. We would not be here without plants. Plants would not be here without us. It's considered a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Remember that from an earlier video. Okay? Now, eventually an environment has to grow up. Okay? All of this energy is being used. All of this energy is being cycled through the environment. And this is what's known as ecological succession. Ecological succession is how an ecosystem changes over time. It grows up, just like you. It starts out as a baby. It grows into a toddler. It finally becomes a teenager. Then it's an adult. Okay, known as ecological succession. So when an environment grows up to maturity, it starts out as a lot of dirt and rocks. Okay, then what happens is you get a term called primary succession, where little lichens and little mosses start to grow on all the different rocks. Then you get small annuals, grasses, and perennials that will start to grow on top of those. Okay, now what that does is that brings in other animals from other places to start living there. And what they start to do is they start to spread the seed of these grasses and these perennials and these small little shrubs and plants around. And so that brings in more plant life. So now you get little shrubs. You can see over time, and this takes millions and millions of years to happen, over time, the environment starts to grow up. With more animals coming to the area, they bring in more seeds falling off their fur and stuff like that. And then we get trees starting to grow, and then eventually we become a full-fledged forest. Now, in ecological succession, this is what's known as a climax community. Okay, a climax community is when the forest is fully grown. Eventually, what's going to happen to that climax community is some sort of destruction is going to happen. A forest fire, some sort of natural disaster, and then the entire process begins again. It's okay. It's healthy. A volcanic eruption that erupted over Mount St. Helens totally destroyed the environment, but slowly but surely, the environment is growing back up, healthier and happier. The same sort of thing happened out in the Pine Barrens here on Long Island. Okay, many years ago, there was big fires out in the Pine Barrens if you're driving out to the east end of Long Island. And it totally destroyed the Pine Barrens out there. Everything was charcoal and burnt down to the ground. Well, now we're about 20 years later, 25 years later, you can see the Pine Barrens start to regrow and start to flourish again. This is what's known as ecological succession. It's a natural way for the environment to reset itself. Here's an example. That was a forest example. Here's an example of what would happen in a typical pond. Okay, you have pioneer organisms, which are the first organisms to come into an area, like I talked about earlier. Pioneer organisms, like our grasses, our lichens that are on rocks, and then finally we mature into a climax community. Now, let's say we take a little pond here. In 1840, it was a pond with little fish. That was it. Through weathering and erosion and the wind blowing and everything like that, the pond starts to get filled in with sand and debris and twigs, and they all start to decompose and they start to fill up the bottom here. Well, this happens over years and years and years, and the pond starts to fill up more and more and more and more and more and more. Eventually, the pond is totally filled with extra soil and dirt just from the weather bringing it in, from other animals kicking dirt into the lake or into the pond. Then eventually the pond fills up. Plant life starts to grow, and then a forest will grow over the top of that. But you can see from 1840 to 1990, that's over 100 years for a small pond to mature from being a pond into a new climax community, a stable community, a mature environment. This is what's known as ecological succession, or the way environments grow up.